Did you know that behind the opulent facades of Victorian mansions lay rooms whose existence guests were completely unaware of? These hidden corners served as permanent residences for those who, day in and day out, maintained the splendor and grandeur of a vast empire. Architects deliberately designed these opulent homes with separate, narrow staircases and hidden doors so that the staff could move through the building completely unnoticed. Behind heavy velvet curtains and gilded frames lay a hard life, full of strict rules and harsh daily restrictions. The servants' and maids' bedrooms were usually located under the very roof, where the summer heat was unbearable and icy drafts blew in the winter. Every morning, these people woke up before dawn and silently created the illusion of perfect order for their wealthy masters. All the hardest and dirtiest work took place deep below, where warm sunlight almost never penetrated. The lower levels of the building housed huge, noisy kitchens, perpetually damp laundry rooms, and dark coal cellars. Due to the constant dampness and poor ventilation, these work areas often caused serious illnesses among the service staff. We're about to take a look inside cramped cubbyholes and cold basements to see the true face of the Victorian era without the usual embellishments found in books. Watch the video to the end, and you'll learn how the daily lives of servants were organized in London's wealthiest homes. I'm going to reveal the best-kept secret regarding daily life in the wealthy homes of that era. In Victorian mansions, every square foot of space was used with maximum efficiency and meticulous planning. Often, no separate rooms were allocated for the lower-ranking servants, and they had to sleep right in their work areas. Special furniture was used for this purpose, which during the day served as ordinary wardrobes or chests. Such designs allowed the servants' private lives to be hidden from the eyes of the estate owners. In the evening, these massive wooden objects transformed into narrow, hard sleeping quarters. The architecture of the servants' quarters was designed to ensure maximum concealment of all domestic activities. In some houses, folding beds built directly into wall niches in the corridors were used. During the day, these niches were closed off with heavy wooden panels that blended in with the wall finish. Such engineering solutions emphasize the status of the servants as a functional addition to the house. A person literally vanished from the mansion space along with their sleeping quarters. This created the impression that the house was maintained by invisible forces with no personal needs. Privacy in such conditions was practically unattainable for most of the mansion staff. The constant presence of colleagues and the noise from the home systems prevented proper rest. The walls of the servants' quarters were often thin and let in any sounds from neighboring rooms. Even while sleeping, a servant had to be ready to respond to the ringing of a bell. This readiness dictated specific requirements for the placement of sleeping quarters near the service areas. A person's personal time was completely subordinated to the rhythm of the aristocratic family's life. In Victorian society, it was believed that excessive comfort undermined the work ethic of the servants. Therefore, sleeping furniture was deliberately made as simple as possible and even austere in its design. Narrow frames did not allow a person to lie down in complete comfort and relaxation. Fabrics for bedding were chosen from the coarsest varieties of gray linen or cotton. All these details emphasize the social distance between the masters and their numerous servants. The bed was merely a tool for regaining strength before the next day's work. It is interesting to note that some types of such furniture have survived in old estates to this day. Modern researchers find hidden fastenings for hammocks in the most unexpected places within buildings. This indicates that reality was far harsher than official blueprints and plans. Servants often adapted the space themselves to meet their minimal needs, using whatever was at hand, Dark corners of attics and alcoves under staircases became their only refuge for a few hours each night. The history of these places is filled with silent patience and strict diligence. The heating system of the mansions rarely reached the corners where the junior staff's sleeping quarters were located. The heat from the kitchen stoves was the only source of warmth for those who slept on the lower floors. During the summer months, these same rooms became unbearably stuffy and damp. Windows, if they existed at all, were painted over or covered with bars to preserve the building's exterior aesthetics. The servants lived in a world of perpetual twilight and limited view of the outside world. This fostered a particular mindset of dependence on the whims and moods of their employers. We'd love to hear your thoughts on these living conditions of the Victorian era. What do you think about the need to conceal the private lives of servants back then? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your opinion matters to us. And be sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new, fascinating stories about the hidden sides of the past. Want to learn a secret that will change your life and your perception of London's majestic architecture? The most common place for servants to sleep in city mansions was the attic. These rooms were located on the top floor, right under the roof, in an area with the greatest temperature fluctuations. In summer, the heat from the scorching roof tiles was stifling, and in winter, cold drafts swept through. The narrow staircases leading up were so steep that it was difficult to climb them after a long day. The attics consisted of long corridors with numerous tiny doors leading to cramped quarters. The upper floors of mansions were often designed with minimal ceiling height standards in mind. The sloping roof walls created awkward corners where dust and cobwebs accumulated. Servants had to literally bend over to move around their rooms. The lack of ventilation meant that the air in the attic was always heavy and stale. This contributed to rapid fatigue and poor sleep quality after a hard shift. Despite the height, the view from the windows was often blocked by decorative elements of the building's facade. For many maids and cooks, the attic was the only place they could call home. Here they spent their rare, free hours mending clothes or reading by candlelight. The walls of these rooms held the stories of hundreds of people whose names have long been forgotten by history. Despite the harsh conditions, the servants tried to keep their quarters spotlessly clean. It was a matter of honor and a requirement from the housekeeper, who regularly checked to ensure everything was in order. Every item had its own strictly designated place in this tiny space. Communication between the attic and the rest of the house was carried out via a system of bells and intercoms. Even at the very top, a servant remained within reach of their employers at any hour of the day or night. The sound of a bell might ring out at midnight, demanding an immediate descent to the lower floors. This constant anticipation of a summons made sleep restless and failed to provide proper rest. The house's architecture was designed so that the servant was always on duty. Personal space in the attic was merely a temporary respite between endless duties. During the winter months, the cold in the attics became a real ordeal for the house's inhabitants. Fireplaces in these rooms were either absent entirely or too small to provide heat. Servants used hot water bottles or heated bricks wrapped in cloth to keep warm. Windows were often frosted over from the inside, and the water in the wash basins would freeze by morning. The lack of heat was compensated for by piling on several blankets made of coarse wool. Every morning began with a battle against the cold and the need to get to work immediately. Why do you think the owners of these mansions chose the most uncomfortable places for their servants to live? In the next chapter, you'll learn about other unusual places used for sleeping when there were no spare rooms. Watch this video all the way to the end to uncover all the secrets of Victorian life. And you've definitely never heard of this unique secret, since official records rarely mentioned such details. The kitchen of a Victorian mansion was the heart of the home, where work almost never stopped. For junior staff, such as kitchen assistants, this place became not only a workspace, but also a bedroom. After the late supper was over and the dishes were cleared away, temporary mattresses or straw mats were spread out on the floor. The heat radiating from the massive coal stoves was the main advantage of this arrangement during the cold season. However, rest here was intermittent due to the early start of preparatory work. Kitchen areas were usually located on the ground floor or in the basement, where humidity was always high. Walls made of cold stone and floors of uneven slabs required constant attention to hygiene. The air here was saturated with the smells of grease, spices, and coal, which did not dissipate even at night. In such conditions, servants slept directly under the cutting tables or in niches used for storing firewood. The lack of any sleeping furniture was offset by the proximity to sources of heat and water. Every object in the kitchen took on a new, uncharacteristic function at night. The architecture of the basement rooms often created conditions for condensation to accumulate on the ceilings and walls. Drops of water could fall directly onto the sleeping servants, making their rest even more difficult and unpleasant. The stone floors always remained cold, despite the operation of the kitchen systems and stoves. The use of rugs or fabric mats was strictly prohibited for reasons of fire safety and cleanliness. Servants were forced to adapt to harsh physical conditions with no hope of change. Their world was confined to the walls of the basement and the endless cycle of food preparation. Interestingly, senior servants, such as cooks, were entitled to more decent living conditions. They had their own small rooms, located near the kitchen but separated by doors. This created a clear hierarchy even among the service staff of a single department. Junior servants saw this as an incentive for long service and career advancement within the household. The desire for a bed of their own and some privacy was a powerful motivator for diligence. The social ladder began right here, on the cold floor of the Victorian kitchen. Many mansions had complex ventilation systems that emitted a constant hum and vibration. These mechanical noises became the background against which servants learned to fall asleep and recharge. The light from oil lamps, which never went out completely, cast whimsical shadows on the walls. The sense of security here was illusory, as the kitchen was always a high-stakes zone. Any lapse in food storage or stove maintenance could lead to serious problems. Keeping watch over the fire at night was often part of the duties of those who slept nearby. The unique nature of sleeping in the kitchen took a toll on the health and well-being of the young workers. Constantly breathing in smoke and living in damp conditions did not promote longevity. However, in those days, such conditions were considered perfectly acceptable for people of their social class. Like this video if you appreciate the comfort of your own bedroom and the modern right to privacy. This small gesture will help us tell more people about the hidden history of everyday life. We continue our journey through the hidden corners of old estates. What you are about to learn will turn your understanding of the logistics and structure of life in historic homes upside down. The servants' corridors in Victorian mansions were veritable labyrinths, devoid of any elegance. These narrow passageways served as the arteries of the house, through which people and goods moved silently. At night, however, these same corridors became makeshift sleeping quarters for temporary workers or junior staff. Due to a shortage of rooms, beds were often placed directly against the walls, further narrowing the already cramped spaces. Sleep in such places was anything but restful, due to the constant movement of colleagues and the echo of footsteps. The walls of the corridors were usually covered with cheap, dark-colored paint to hide the dust and soot. The floors were paved with stone or rough planks that made sharp sounds at the slightest touch. Under such conditions, it was impossible to create an atmosphere of comfort or security from the outside world. The air in the corridors was stagnant, as windows were extremely rare here and never open. The servants who slept here were in constant semi-darkness, broken only by the dim light of the night lamps. Every morning began with a quick tidying up of bedding so as not to interfere with daytime traffic. The building's utility systems often ran right through the service corridors, creating a distinctive backdrop for sleep. The sounds of water in the pipes, the hum from the ventilation shafts, and the creaking of transmission mechanisms accompanied people's rest. This created the sensation of being inside a massive machine that never stops. For many, such an environment became routine, but it inevitably affected the psychological state of the workers. The lack of personal space and the constant exposure to colleagues fostered a sense of social vulnerability. The corridor was a communal area where no one could feel in control of the situation. In some estates, it was common practice to use the spaces under the stairs to set up sleeping quarters. These triangular spaces were cramped and dark, but they offered at least some illusion of privacy. Small beds or simple cots stuffed with cheap sawdust were placed there. Dust from the stair treads inevitably seeped into these makeshift rooms with every step the masters took from above. This was a vivid embodiment of the social hierarchy, where some people literally walked over the heads of others. Despite the discomfort, such places were often considered better than open corridors. Often the hallways contained cupboards for storing clean linens or supplies, which served as additional partitions. Servants tried to use these pieces of furniture to create a semblance of a private sleeping area. They hung sheets or pieces of fabric to shield themselves from the gaze of passers-by. These makeshift curtains were the only way to gain even a modicum of privacy. The house administration usually turned a blind eye to this, as long as it did not interfere with the main work. The human need for privacy manifested itself even in such harsh circumstances. Historical floor plans of these houses often conceal the true number of people living in these hallways. On paper, the mansion might have looked spacious, but the reality was one of cramped quarters and overcrowding among the staff. Every available nook or cranny was used to house yet another worker necessary to maintain the family status. This led to service areas being overcrowded beyond measure. Social pressure and the need to earn a living forced people to put up with the lack of decent living conditions. The corridor was a symbol of the temporary and unstable nature of their situation. In modern architecture, such spaces have long since disappeared or been converted into functional utility rooms. However, the walls of old buildings still hold the memory of those who spent their nights on stone floors and in narrow passageways. This is an important chapter in social history that teaches us to appreciate modern achievements in the areas of human rights and comfort. Understanding how people lived in the past helps us better appreciate the path society has taken. Every step taken through the restored mansion today should be accompanied by respect for the labor of its former inhabitants. Do you think such living conditions could have affected the quality of the servants' work in those days? In the next chapter, you'll learn how the weather and changing seasons altered life in these hidden quarters. We continue to uncover the secrets of Victorian mansions. Within the community of servants in a Victorian mansion, there existed a complex and unshakable system of ranks. This hierarchy determined not only the size of the salary and the scope of duties, but also the quality of the sleeping quarters. The butler and housekeeper occupied the highest rank and were entitled to their own, quite comfortable rooms. These rooms were furnished with solid furniture, had fireplaces, and even decorative elements that emphasized the owner's status. This arrangement served as a powerful incentive for junior staff who dreamed of a similar level of privacy. The gap between the living conditions of the top servants and ordinary workers was enormous. The second tier of servants, which included cooks and personal valets, also enjoyed certain privileges regarding sleeping arrangements. Their rooms were located in more prestigious parts of the servants' wing, away from the noise of the kitchen and the dampness of the cellars. They often lived alone or in pairs, which allowed them to have at least some personal space. The furniture in these rooms was simpler than that of the masters, but still quite functional and sturdy. The presence of a mirror, a wash basin, and a wardrobe was considered a sign of high status within the household. These people guarded their privileges and strictly maintained their distance. The division between clean and dirty servants also influenced the placement of their sleeping quarters within the house. Those who had direct contact with the owners lived closer to the main living quarters, so they could be available at any moment. Kitchen and laundry staff were relegated to the most remote and unattractive corners of the building. This created a geographical map of social status within a single mansion. A transition from one category to another was accompanied by a ceremonial move to a new room or a new floor. Such moments became milestones in a servant's life, marking their professional success. Discipline regarding sleep was enforced not only by rules, but also by architectural design. The doors to the rooms of the junior servants often lacked locks on the inside, allowing management to enter at any time. This underscored the lack of a right to complete privacy, even during rest. The housekeeper could conduct surprise inspections of cleanliness and order in the middle of the night or early in the morning. Any violation of the rules, such as keeping prohibited items or an unmade bed, was punished immediately. A servant was always under supervision, even when not performing their direct duties. Bedding materials also strictly corresponded to a servant's rank in the household hierarchy. A butler could sleep on a horsehair mattress with high-quality feather pillows and fine sheets. A junior maid had to make do with a mattress stuffed with dry grass or straw, which over time became hard and lumpy. These differences were obvious to everyone and served as a constant reminder of each person's place in the social structure. The bed was not merely a place of rest, but a symbol of the level of stability and respect one had attained. Victorians believed that such details shaped character and taught humility. Many mansions have preserved records of expenses for maintaining servants' quarters, which confirm these differences. The archives contain receipts for the purchase of high-quality fabrics for some and cheap rags for others. These documents serve as impartial witnesses to the era, complementing eyewitness accounts and memoirs. Every line in the ledger reflects the fates of people who lived under the same roof, but in different realities. The Victorian mansion was a microcosm of society as a whole, with all its virtues and vices. Understanding this structure reveals to us the deeper meanings of everyday life in the past. Are you ready for the shocking truth about what a typical servant's night's rest actually consisted of? In the absence of expensive materials, Victorians displayed remarkable practicality, which today may seem excessively harsh. Mattresses for the lower-ranking staff were most often stuffed with cheap straw, reeds, or even corn husks. Such fillings quickly crumbled into dust and required regular replacement, which was the responsibility of the workers themselves. Sleeping on such a surface was hard, and the distinctive smell of dried grass became a constant companion during sleep. Only a few lucky ones had access to mattresses made of cotton or old wool. Fabrics for bedding were chosen solely on the basis of durability, not comfort. Coarse, grayish-colored cloth was the norm for the service quarters on the lower floor. Such linens were difficult to wash by hand, and they remained stiff for a long time after drying in the cold air. The pillows were small and often stuffed with scraps of fabric or cheap feathers, which eventually clumped together into tight lumps. The blankets were made of heavy, prickly wool that kept one warm but irritated the skin. Every item of bedding was a functional tool, devoid of even the slightest hint of elegance. Personal hygiene routines were carried out in the same rooms where the servants slept, using simple basins and jugs. Water was carried up by hand from the lower floors, and its quantity was strictly limited. Often, the same water was used by several people to save time and effort in transporting it. The lack of proper bathrooms made morning ablutions a quick and symbolic process. Soap was cheap and had a pungent odor that mingled with the smells of the kitchen and laundry. Despite this, the servants tried to look impeccable before appearing before their masters. Clothing and personal belongings were stored in wooden trunks, which often served as the only place to sit. Inside the trunk, strict order reigned, as there was simply no room for extra items. Usually a servant had 2 sets of uniforms and 1 set of civilian clothes for rare days off. All of this had to be kept in perfect condition, despite the lack of facilities for ironing and storage. The chest was not only a piece of furniture, but also a safe for small valuables and letters from home. It was the only item in the vast mansion that truly belonged to a person. The temperature in the bedrooms during the winter was only a few degrees higher than outside. The stone walls of the buildings absorbed the cold and released it into the rooms throughout the night. Servants used bricks heated in the kitchen or metal containers with hot coals to warm the bed even slightly. They often slept in several layers of clothing, including bonnets and knitted vests, to avoid catching a cold. In the summer, however, the lack of air circulation turned the attics into veritable ovens, where sleep became a torment. These extreme conditions demanded ironclad health and incredible resilience. How do you think such harsh conditions affected the length of service for people in a single mansion? In the next chapter, you'll learn how the lack of privacy and shared rooms shaped relationships within the household. We continue our exploration of the hidden reality of the Victorian era, which was concealed from the eyes of contemporaries. One of the hardest aspects of life for Victorian servants was the near-total lack of personal space. In most mansions, ordinary workers lived in shared rooms where 4 to 10 people could be present at the same time. This meant that every action, from changing clothes to reading personal letters, took place in full view of colleagues.
What are we gonna do?
Social control within the group was extremely high, and any deviation from accepted norms immediately became public knowledge. People were constantly in the line of sight of those around them, which created enormous psychological strain. Privacy was seen as an unattainable luxury, available only to the highest ranks in the household hierarchy. Dormitories were usually divided by gender and age to minimize potential conflicts and maintain moral order. However, even under such conditions, the cramped quarters were incredible, and the beds stood so close together that their occupants could hear their neighbors breathing. There was no room for screens or partitions in such quarters, as they hindered cleaning and the housekeeper's supervision. All daily routines were standardized and subject to a strict schedule that left no room for individuality. Each member of the collective had to adapt to the rhythm of the others' lives, suppressing their personal needs. Sleep became a collective activity regulated by internal rules. The architecture of shared dormitories often featured a single large window or a skylight in the ceiling. This meant that lighting and ventilation were uneven for all occupants of the room. The person whose bed was closest to the window suffered from the cold in winter, but had the advantage of fresh air in summer. The rest lived in an area of stagnant air and dim light, which took a toll on their health. The allocation of sleeping spots in the room also followed the internal hierarchy and length of service in the household. Newcomers always received the most uncomfortable and darkest corners, waiting their turn for better conditions. An important aspect of life in the common rooms was the need to maintain strict hygiene. Servants had to take special care to keep their bodies and clothes clean so as not to cause dissatisfaction among their colleagues. Morning ablutions in the common room required dexterity and the ability to maintain dignity in cramped conditions. Each person was given their own basin and pitcher, but the space to use them was extremely limited. The lack of privacy forced people to develop specific habits and gestures that minimized physical contact. It was a unique choreography of daily life, honed over years of communal living. Today, shared servants' quarters are of particular interest to sociologists and historians. They serve as a vivid example of how communal living shapes human character. The Victorian era fostered a unique culture of cohabitation, grounded in strict rules and mutual respect. These spaces taught people patience, the ability to compromise, and to appreciate small joys. Despite all the difficulties, many servants recalled their years living in shared bedrooms as a time of the strongest friendships in their lives. The history of these rooms is a story of humanity that endures despite any circumstances. Studies of servants' diaries and letters reveal how they perceived the lack of privacy. Many wrote of their dream to have at least 1 hour a day when no one was watching them. This longing for solitude was one of the main reasons people sought promotion. Being granted a private room was seen as gaining personal freedom and a new social status. The Victorian home was a battlefield for dignity, where every inch of personal space was earned through years of impeccable service. These stories make our understanding of the past deeper and more multifaceted. The indoor climate in Victorian mansions was extremely variable and heavily dependent on the season. During the winter months, the stone walls of the buildings acted as cold accumulators, chilling the servants' quarters to freezing temperatures. The windows in the servants' quarters often had cracks through which icy air and snow dust seeped in. Central heating, if it existed at all, usually covered only the formal halls and the owner's bedrooms. Servants were forced to rely on warm clothing and physical activity to keep warm while working. Nighttime became a true test of endurance and resilience. In the summer, however, the situation was reversed, especially in the rooms under the roof. The scorching roof tiles turned the attics into veritable saunas, where temperatures could soar to extreme levels. The lack of ventilation and small windows prevented the rooms from cooling down even at night. The servants suffered from the stifling heat and humidity, which made proper rest practically impossible after a hard day's work. In the basement rooms, meanwhile, a damp, musty atmosphere prevailed during this time of year, contributing to the growth of mold on the walls. Each season brought its own specific challenges for the inhabitants of these hidden rooms. Combating dampness was a constant concern for the servants throughout the Victorian era. Stone foundations and the lack of waterproofing meant that water literally seeped through the floor on the basement levels. This created a distinct, musty odor that lingered for years and permeated the servants' clothing. To combat the dampness, they used braziers with coals, which were placed in the hallways for several hours a day. However, these measures provided only a temporary effect and required constant supervision to prevent fires. Basement dwellers were constantly exposed to conditions harmful to their respiratory systems. It is interesting to note how climatic conditions influence the choice of materials for uniforms and bedding. The footmen's winter uniforms were made of thick wool, which was very heavy and took a long time to dry. The summer versions were lighter, but still did not provide adequate comfort in the stuffy rooms. Bedding was changed extremely rarely and did not always match the room's temperature. All these details created a backdrop of constant physical discomfort, which was perceived as an inevitable part of the job. The Victorian era did not prioritize the health of workers. Water supply systems in old mansions also suffered from temperature fluctuations. In winter, pipes could freeze, depriving the servants of access to water in their wing of the building. This meant having to carry water from wells or kitchen reservoirs by hand through the entire house. In the summer, however, water in the tanks could stagnate and develop an unpleasant taste and odor due to the heat. Maintaining cleanliness and hygiene under such conditions became a daily feat. The servants had to provide impeccable service to their employers, despite any technical glitches and the vagaries of the weather. The history of the climate inside the mansion is a story of humanity's struggle against nature under conditions of limited resources. Servants were on the front lines of this struggle, the first to face the cold and damp. Their experience and knowledge of how to retain heat or ventilate a room were passed down from generation to generation. These little household tricks were no less important than the skill of setting the table properly. Ultimately, it was these details that shaped the unique atmosphere of a Victorian estate. We continue to explore these hidden pages of history to piece together a complete picture of life in that era. The lives of Victorian servants were governed by a strict and relentless rhythm dictated by the needs of the family they served. Sleep was merely a brief respite between endless duties, and its end was always abrupt. Every morning began with a sharp ring of a bell or the strike of a gong echoing through the servants' corridors. For the junior staff, the wake-up call came long before dawn, often at 4 or 5 in the morning. The first task was to light the stoves, clean the fireplaces, and prepare the house for the awakening of its principal inhabitants. The minutes following the wake-up call were the most intense, requiring an instant transition from sleep to active duty. The mansion's bell system was a true engineering marvel of its time, extending throughout every floor. On the wall of the servants' hallway hung a panel with dozens of bells, each corresponding to a specific room. The sound of each bell was unique, allowing the servants to identify the source of the call by ear. Even at night, the staff on duty had to respond instantly to any signal from the owners. This meant that sleep was never truly deep or restorative. Constant readiness for action was a professional requirement that was strictly observed. An important part of the morning schedule was a prayer or a brief gathering of the entire staff before work began. This event emphasized the unity of the team and its dedication to the interests of the family. Servants lined up in hierarchical order, demonstrating their place within the household structure. This served as a reminder of moral values and the responsibility to fulfill one's duties. Victorian society placed great importance on religious upbringing and discipline among the lower classes. Such rituals helped maintain strict order and obedience within the household. The process of cleaning the fireplaces and lighting the fire was one of the hardest and dirtiest parts of the morning routine. Servants had to do this silently so as not to wake the masters sleeping in the staterooms. Ash and coal dust were constant companions of their mornings, requiring special care when cleaning their clothes afterward. It was a battle against time and dirt that repeated itself day after day for many years. The ability to maintain the fire and keep the hearth clean was considered a basic skill for any junior staff member. The work began in the dark and cold, creating comfort for those who would wake up later. By the time the family came down for breakfast, the house had to be sparkling clean and smell fresh. All traces of the servants' hard morning labor were carefully hidden behind the closed doors of the service quarters. The servants themselves presented an impeccable appearance, donning clean uniforms and assuming respectful postures. The transition from grueling physical labor to the role of impassive assistance occurred instantly. This required immense self-control and the ability to switch between different social roles. Victorian servants were masters of transformation and restraint in all circumstances. The history of a mansion's morning rituals is the story of the unseen heroism of millions of people. Their day began while the world was still asleep and ended late at night. The rhythm of their lives was strictly tied to mechanical clocks and bells, depriving them of any spontaneity. Understanding this schedule helps us better appreciate the value of the comforts we take for granted today. The old walls of the estates still echo with the sound of morning bells and the footsteps of those who hurried to answer their master's calls. This is an important part of our shared cultural heritage. Today, many Victorian mansions have been converted into museums or divided into modern, high-end apartments. However, behind the luxurious facades and restored interiors, traces of the hidden life we have been studying can still be found. Researchers and restorers are discovering hidden staircases, tiny alcoves, and remnants of old communication systems. These architectural artifacts serve as silent witnesses to an era when the space of the home was strictly divided into the world of the masters and the world of the servants. Studying these details allows us to paint a more complete and honest picture of the past, one that goes beyond the pretty postcards. Every discovery in the servants' quarters adds new details to the portrait of Victorian society. Interest in the everyday history of domestic servants has grown significantly in recent decades, thanks to popular books and films. People want to know not only about balls and political intrigues, but also about how those who made this glamour possible lived. Museums have begun opening basements and attics to visitors that were previously closed to the public. This allows visitors to physically experience the contrast between the grand reception halls and the cramped staff quarters. Such an immersion in the reality of the past evokes deep emotions and prompts reflection on social justice. The legacy of the invisible rooms is becoming an important tool for education and fostering empathy. Another important aspect of this heritage is the study of the social relationships that formed within these walls. The hierarchical system, discipline, and corporate ethics of the servants have had a significant influence on the development of modern service and human resources management. Many principles of labor organization in large mansions have formed the basis for the operations of modern high-end hotels and restaurants. The Victorian era established a standard of service that was long considered the benchmark of professionalism and restraint. However, we also remember the price people paid to achieve this standard. This legacy teaches us to value human labor and respect the rights of every worker. The influence of service area architecture on the development of urban planning cannot be overstated. The experience of constructing multi-story buildings with designated staff areas helped shape modern standards for functional zoning in buildings. Many technical solutions, such as kitchen elevators and ventilation systems, were first tested in Victorian mansions. Over time, these innovations became accessible to the general public, significantly improving the quality of life in cities. The journey from a cramped attic to a comfortable modern apartment was long and difficult. We are the heirs to this progress, which began in the dark corridors of the past. Documentary evidence, such as diaries and memoirs of former servants, continues to be republished and studied. These texts give us a unique opportunity to hear the voices of those who remained voiceless for so long. They describe not only the hardships, but also the joys, friendships, and professional pride of the workers in large households. These accounts shatter stereotypes of servants as faceless shadows, restoring their human dignity and individuality. Every story of a night spent in a cold, cramped room adds depth to our understanding of history. We learn to see, beyond the dry facts, living people with their feelings and dreams. Preserving these historic spaces requires significant effort and investment from the government and private owners. Restoring servants' quarters often proves a more challenging task than restoring grand halls, due to the use of cheap and short-lived materials in the past. However, this work is essential for preserving the integrity of our city's cultural landscape. Without understanding how the lower levels functioned, we will never fully grasp the grandeur of the upper levels. A Victorian mansion is a single organism, every part of which is equally important to history. We bear the responsibility of passing this memory on to future generations. To conclude our journey through the hidden rooms, it is worth noting that they serve as a reminder of the fragility of human well-being. The story of where the servants slept teaches us to appreciate the achievements that have made our lives comfortable and safe. We must remember those who, through their labor, laid the foundation of modern civilization while remaining in the shadows. Their silent presence within the walls of old houses continues to inspire us to uncover the truth about the past. The Victorian era is gone forever, but its lessons remain relevant today. We continue to uncover the secrets hidden behind the closed doors of history. Many mansions today offer special educational programs dedicated to the lives of domestic servants. Children and adults alike can try their hand at being a maid or a footman to better understand the hardships of this work. Such interactive learning methods help break down the barriers of time and space. History becomes not a collection of dates, but a personal experience that changes our perception of the world around us. The legacy of the unseen rooms lives on in our hearts and minds, inspiring new discoveries. It is an eternal search for the truth of how we became who we are today. We have completed our extensive exploration of the hidden world of Victorian mansions and learned the shocking truth about how those who ensured the aristocracy's comfort actually lived. This story of cold attics, damp hallways, and cramped cubbyholes reminds us of the price paid to create the splendor of a great era. We saw that behind the outward grandeur lay harsh daily realities and a lack of basic amenities for millions of people. Understanding these details makes our perception of history deeper and more human, prompting us to appreciate the achievements of modern society. Please suggest topics in the comments for our future videos that you'd like to see on this channel. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss new exciting explorations of the mysteries of the past that we uncover just for you.